on trauma-informed care. I'm going to hang tight a minute or two as folks are trickling in and getting their audio set up. But for those of you who've joined us, thank you for being here. If you are a health-related social needs service provider or you are interested in becoming one, you are in the right place. And if you are just interested in listening about trauma-informed care, you are welcome here as well. But hang tight 1 minute or two and we will get started. Thanks, everyone. For those of you who are here already, we would love to know who's in the room. If you want to drop an intro in the chat and share anything that you would like to share about yourself, your organization, who you are representing today, who you're showing up as, and any other information about yourself, please feel free to put that in the chat. And I'll do one more little intro. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our health-related social needs training series. My name is Tanya Curiel. I'm with the Oregon Health Authority's Transformation Center. And today we are talking about trauma-informed care. We have guests from Trauma Informed Oregon joining us. So thank you for being here. Thank you all who are showing up today. Really appreciate you being here. If you are interested in becoming a health-related social needs provider, or you are already one, or you are just interested in trauma-informed care, you are in the right place. We will get things started now. So Chelsea, if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, a few quick tips for those who are here. Please use the chat function throughout our training today. There might be some opportunities to come off mute. We will try our best to answer questions as we can. The majority of our time today will be a training with Trauma Informed Oregon, so I'll let that team and give a little bit more intro about what they want for chat and asking questions. This session will be recorded and it will be available on our website. That will give you the link afterwards. There's closed captioning, so you could click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And we also have some great interpreters doing live interpretation to Spanish. So if you would prefer to have to listen to this in Spanish, you can select the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. And next slide, please. All right, and what are we going to cover today? We'll kick things off with a quick little overview of how trauma-informed care relates to being a health-related social needs service provider. And then we will go into a training offered by Mandy Davis, the director at Trauma Informed Oregon, and she'll do an intro to trauma-informed care. And once that wraps up, we will go over next steps. If you are ready to become a health-related social needs service provider, we'll give you the steps to do that, and then we will share some resources where you can go to learn more.
I'll interrupt you just a second. I've gotten to ask
please.
about assigning the panel to the interpreter. Let me just make sure that's been done.
Yeah. I don't see my my channel assigned, so.
We're working on that on the back end here, I believe.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Thank you.
And maybe we will hang tight a second or two because we want to make sure that folks are able to hear all of this in Spanish if they would like to. But thank you everyone who is putting their intros in the chat. It's nice to see so many new and returning faces here.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
We can hear you in the main room, Ruth.
Okay. Hmm. Yeah, I've not.
This is Maria. I'm the other Spanish interpreter.
All right, thank you all for your patience. I know it's been a weekend of patience with technology, so thanks for hanging in there.
Yeah, we're currently working on trying to fix this, so it should be hopefully not too much longer. Thank you all for sitting tight and being patient with us.
Yeah, in the meantime, I would love to take a quick poll in the chat. Who has already become an HRSN service provider? I would love to know if you've already enrolled as one, whether with OHA or with your local CCO, or if you are still considering it, or if you are just here because you want to learn about trauma-informed care. I would just love to do a quick read in the chat, if you wouldn't mind. And if you'd rather not share, that is okay as well. No pressure, just a curiosity. Thank you to those who are sharing. Great. It looks like we have a mix of folks, some who are just here for learning, which is wonderful, and others who are enrolled, others who are considering it. Great to see. Thank you.
See, the Spanish interpretation channel is now working. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I was just about to suggest the plan B, so I'm glad that worked so quickly. Thanks everyone for your patience. Let's get rocking and rolling. All right. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Jesse Wilson, the 1115 Strategic Operations Director, to give us a little quick lead into why it's important for HRSN service providers to be trauma informed.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Hi, folks. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Wonderful. Thanks for that. As Tanya mentioned, my name is Jessie Wilson. I'm the 1115 Waiver Strategic Operations Director. Thank you all for being with us today. I am certainly glad to be here. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. I think a couple more. Okay, so we have presented on health-related social needs, or HRSN, provider qualifications in the past during this series. And while I'm not going to delve into all the details of all the qualifications today, I do want to focus on one specific HRSN provider qualification, and that is to be trauma-informed. One of the goals that we have for HRSN service delivery is to ensure that eligible members receive high quality, trauma informed, culturally and linguistically appropriate HRSN services in a timely way. And the overarching aim of this provider qualification is to ensure that we support individuals accessing HRSN services, not only in a way that meets their needs, but in a way that ensures that we aren't doing more harm while we're trying to do good. As a reminder, individuals who are eligible for these new HRSN services include adults and youth discharged from an institution for mental disease, a residential mental health and substance use disorder facility, or an inpatient psychiatric unit, adults and youth who've been released from incarceration, individuals currently or who have previously been involved in Oregon's child welfare system, individuals transitioning to dual Medicaid and Medicare status, individuals who meet the definition of HUD homeless, or individuals who meet the definition of at risk of homelessness, and then starting in 2025, young adults with special healthcare needs. As we know, many of these individuals who are part of the populations that I just named have health-related social needs and are often high risk for or have a history of trauma. We also know that many of the HRSN services will be delivered through community partners who do have the expertise in the delivery of HRSN services and are trusted by the communities they serve. This does include using a trauma-informed framework. However, our goal is for all HRSN service providers to use a trauma-informed model to support eligible individuals to access the new HRSN services. Those include climate, housing, nutrition-related supports, as well as the new HRSN outreach and engagement services. And our goal is that these services are delivered in ways that help prevent trauma and further harm. As an example, I recently listened to a panel on homelessness at the Health and Housing Institute in Maryland a couple weeks ago. The panelists were individuals with lived experience who bravely shared about their journey and experiences in becoming homeless. I listened to their stories, which included, probably not surprising to the folks in this room, but I listened to their stories, which included incarceration, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, traumatic injuries, car accidents. All of these adverse experiences impacted their access to housing services, health, and overall quality of life. And they further highlighted the intersection with trauma and health-related social needs. I'm sure many of you know individuals with similar experiences, and I just want to thank you for coming here today in support of continued learning and recognition that trauma-informed policy and practices are crucial across health systems, including HRSN service delivery. With that, I am excited to be joined by our partners with Trauma Informed Oregon, partners who are crucial and can help us do this important work. So I think I will turn it back to you, Tanya, to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessie. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mandy Davis, the Director of Trauma Informed Oregon, to take it away for the remaining time we have together.
Excellent. Can you let me share? Yep. So y'all give me just a second to get all my screens set up. All right, I'm going to move all these screens around. And so I am going to, in a minute, invite you, or actually even now that, you know, if and when you want to turn your cameras on, I always love to see faces and have some relationship in this chat about trauma-informed care. So I'm going to put your names on one side. So a couple things for you to know, to set this up kind of to model the model already, is I have your names and hopefully some faces here, and I have the presentation over here, and I have the chat over here. So if I'm not looking directly at the camera, that's what I'm doing. So excellent. Thank you for being here. Jessie, thank you for setting up the purpose of this so amazingly. My name is Mandy Davis. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Director of Trauma Informed Oregon. It is housed here at Portland State University's School of Social Work, Regional Research Institute, probably more acronyms after that. We are primarily funded by the Oregon Health Authority's Child and Family Behavioral Health Team. So I really say all of that just so you know, and what we'll be talking about today is what resources are available to you all. So you'll get these slides, and then I'll show you some things on our website that are available as we go through this, and really to help you kind of lean into trauma-informed care. All right, a couple things. So we kind of, as it's important to us at Trauma Informed Oregon that we do model the model. And so we try to do this even in virtual spaces. The first thing I'm going to kind of say out loud is I'm going to work really hard to talk slowly so the interpreters can not have to chase after my words. And if anybody here knows me, knows that's not easy. So I'm going to work on that slow stuff as we go through. But I've also invited the interpreters to stop me at any point if that gets too fast. So before we jump into content and to learning what we know about our brains and our bodies is we kind of have these 3 R's. They come from Bruce Perry's model, but it's really just as simple as saying, like, in order to learn, we need to kind of be not in fight or flight, to be regulated, or just to be in a good enough space in our brains and our bodies. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you just to take a minute, right? Like, do you need to stretch your body in any way right now? We're going to spend about an hour and 5-10 minutes together. So do you need to bring in some nourishment? Do you have your favorite fidget around, right? This is mine. If you have one of these, this is mine. I also have this one, y'all, just because it's fun to show you. Somebody made me a 3D kind of weird thing, but it's got the rock's face on it. So that's odd, but fun. So bring your fidgets. I want this to be fun learning, right? If you need to stretch, if you need to stand up or sit down, turn off any pings or dings or such things, feel free to do that. If you do have if you join us with your camera on at any point, please know we welcome any 4-leggeds or wingeds or children in the space. So we want you to be able to show up as best as you can to be able to be in space. So that's what we call kind of regulating enough to be able to show up. Another thing that we talk about is relationship, right? So we're going to do a little relating in the chat, a couple different ways. So the first relationship, just to get a sense of who's in here, is I'd love you to say in the chat, in what year-ish did you hear about trauma-informed care? Like in what year-ish? I think we're in the year 2024. I have to remind myself often. It's okay. I got some 2022s, 24, 2016, 21. This will age some of you, I know. 2020. All right, 2018, 2014. All right, Eric. Yep. Excellent. 2010-ish. Cool. So I want to do one more thing in the chat before we jump in, because the reason we go through this, like, we want to not be in fight or flight. We also want to know who's around us in order to learn better, right? If you don't know, if you're just kind of who's behind all the boxes and names, it can feel a little bit awkward to learn in space together. So I'm going to also ask you to get one of your reaction buttons. So I want you to find your emojis or your reaction buttons. If you're new to Zoom, you'll see them called, I believe they are called reaction buttons. So if you have an update, they're called something different. And I'd love for you in the chat just to push one of those buttons. And we're not going to judge why you push that one, but pick some emoji and just offer that in the chat. We'll just say thank you. I see some sunflowers and some hearts and some congratulations. Yeah. React in the new version. Thank you. All right. I see some, yeah, eyeglasses. Okay, cool. I'm going to scroll around. Ooh, Christine, I like whatever that is. Trying to see. Cool. I see some thumbs up. Excellent. See, I like that little smirk on that one. Oh, somebody was rocking it. All right, Regina, you got like all 4. I like it. So y'all, when I'm talking today, I'm going to say things like, am I making some sense? Oh, see, Lynn, you got the updates. You have the fly-in ones. Oh, my favorite. Okay. Ooh, school bus. See, I'll get distracted. Okay. So I'm going to ask every once in a while, I'll be like, are you with me? Right? Because it just helps my body and my central nervous system to regulate, to know that you're kind of here and present. And in trauma-informed care, we want you to have choice. So if you don't want to turn your cameras on, we want to absolutely honor that. And this is a way for us to connect at the same time. So just kind of have those buttons kind of prepared. I also want to really engage you in the chat. So feel free to talk to each other. I mean, don't have a full conversation you don't want us all to know about, right? But if somebody gives a comment and you like that comment, put a little emoji beside that, or like, ooh, that's me too, or can we talk later? So I want you to really bring that into the space so that we can, again, it's going to help you actually learn better if you're in that type of environment. So let's see if I've said everything I need to say before we jump into kind of this reasoning space, right? So what we're going to do is this learning part. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is trauma-informed care, just to level set us. You all, if you're kind of doing the HRSN work or being asked to be culturally responsive, linguistically appropriate, and trauma-informed. So I'm going to talk about what that means. I'm going to give you some tools and some strategies, and then I'm going to end with what TIO, what Trauma-Informed Oregon, is available to do and to support you in that work. I can't tell you how how excited I am to be talking to folks who are doing things like climate and housing and nutrition. So if you don't know, and I'm going to try hard not to get distracted with geeking out about trauma-informed care, y'all, but trauma-informed care really started in housing. The Center for Family Homelessness did some of the first work, realizing that just because we offer someone housing doesn't mean that we have to also think about how that housing is offered, right? Because people weren't actually being successful because we weren't listening to the trauma they were experiencing. So that's and then if you want to get me again, nutrition, we actually do work on community resilience in response to climate disasters and climate change. So that's a whole nother kind of work that we do as well. So I'm so excited to be here. As I talk to you about these things, I want you to think about, but what does this mean in my organization, in my county? And also know there are tons of people doing phenomenal work across the state and the country. So Trauma Informed Oregon I get to go across the state and talk to all sorts of folks from 4-H to judges, to lawyers, to preschool teachers, to parents, and to young people. Everyone gets the same information. What you do with it is what your role and your expectation is around that. All right, so if you can give me an emoji check that you're ready to move forward, you're ready to do some learning together. I'll kind of check in that. Thank you. Excellent. Thanks, Jocelyn. Perfect. All right. So the first question, nothing like a big question at the beginning, but in the chat, if you want to unmute for a minute, you're welcome to do that too. But in the chat, I'd love for you to let me know if you had a couple words to define trauma. So if somebody out of the blue said, what is trauma? What are some words or phrases you might think of that you might say to that person? And as a trauma-informed person, I'm going to wait about 10 seconds and let people have a minute to do that. If no one answers, I'll answer for us, right? So you don't have to feel pressure to do that work. But any words or phrases you associate with the word trauma? Past experiences, yeah. Lived experience, absolutely. Major life events, right? Life event, past or present hurt, pain, negative life experiences, abuse, neglect, past hurt, pain, hurt, significant. Frightening or distressing event, hurt not healed, tragedy, stress, activated sympathetic nervous system, yeah. PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, yeah. Negative lived experiences, wiring and firing, yeah, excellent. So keep those coming. What I didn't say that I want to tell you is what I'm going to do today is super overview, right? Just to kind of give you a flavor of what this thing called trauma-informed care is, and then some tools to how to apply it to your work, your practice, your community. I say that because on our website and also offerings, I'm going to tell you about other offerings you can access for free. We spend like a whole hour on what is trauma, because if we're going to use that word, we need to have some understanding of what it means, right? And to the point of today, also, if you work in languages that you're not in English, the word trauma, you really need to take a minute to do a really good culturally linguistic translation of the word. So just know that we've got some work around that for you to use, but just know it takes a minute to kind of think about what words resonate in the communities that we serve. So what's important for us to know is that we're going to talk about taking a minute. So your program or organization actually can talk about how they're going to define trauma. I'm going to give you just a few things to think about. So, in the dictionary, trauma is described as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Sometimes in my own clinical practice, I might use anything that overwhelms your ability to cope in the moment. SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, uses the 3 E's. So they define trauma through the event. So certain events are always traumatic. Through your experience to the event, right? So we could all experience the same thing, and for lots of different reasons, we'll experience it differently, even though we had the same event. And then the effect. And I think a lot of people really kind of can appreciate the 3 E's because it allows some nuance. In other words, a divorce for one person can be liberating, and for another person can be traumatic, just the event of divorce. However, the person for whom the divorce may be liberating, if then they end up in poverty because of the divorce, it's that effect that makes the difference. So I'm gonna stop for a minute and just see if I can get some emoji check or head shake. Does that make some sense? So same event can be differently experienced, and it also could be more about the effect that happens after an event, right? So what you have access to, those type of things. Excellent, thank you. So one of the things that trauma-informed care that we're going to kind of define in a minute asks us to do is to broaden our lens often, because maybe you've already broadened it, you don't need to do that. But often the times we need to broaden our lens of how we define trauma. Because oftentimes we've said it's like these 5 things, or these 3 things, or these 10 things. When the reality is it's a lot of things and we need a lot of words. So when we do this work, and I'll get you resources, our like glossary to trauma is like 3 pages long. Because we're going to talk about disenfranchised grief. We're going to talk about lack of access to healing practices, right? So again, today's a quick overview, but just leaving you with words matter. And we want to make sure we find the words that have people see their experience in them. Right? So that's really what we're looking for is how can we describe trauma in a way that allows people to see their experience in them? So a couple other words, again, in a longer training we would go into more deeply, but you can talk about the word trauma. I can use the word adversity. I can use the word toxic stress. We can talk about trauma as something that happens to an individual or something that happens to a collective, so to a group of people. We can talk about historical trauma, so the current impacts of things that have happened in the past, which could be intergenerational for the individual family or to the past because of oppressive policies, right, to an entire group of people. And then the work I do is in systemic trauma. And this is really where we look at how our policies and procedures in our institutions, education, healthcare, safety net, social security, child welfare, right, in our institutions, what are the policies and procedures that either create new trauma, activate old trauma, or prevent healing and flourishing? So that's systemic trauma, right? And again, each of these has a lot of depth and really kind of important conversations to each. We can talk about scarcity. So it's just recognizing, really kind of thinking about these different words as we think about what is trauma. And as you might notice, the reason we have to talk about what is trauma is that we have this thing called trauma-informed care. So we first need to really sit with how do we understand trauma? And then what do you know about trauma in the communities you serve? And then in the workforce. We've made a commitment at Trauma Informed Oregon because of listening to amazing, beautiful voices of those with lived experience that we don't talk about trauma without talking about resilience and recovery and joy and liberation. So it's a commitment of ours to always talk about these at the same time, because historically people would just talk about trauma. I was guilty of this years ago, and like resiliency was like another training or another thing, but we want to integrate those together. So just a note, so that's why I'm doing that here, right? Is that we want to talk about resilience and recovery. We also want to recognize, and if we were hanging out in a room together, I'd engage a little bit more some conversation around there's real and just resistance to the word resilience for many people because it feels like a bounce back or like a pat on the back, like you worked yourself through it kind of thing. And bouncing back to something that wasn't healthy anyway isn't always a goal. So for many communities who are experiencing scarcity and poverty and oppression are like, no, thank you. I don't want to bounce back. I want to have post-traumatic growth, right? I want to move through and thrive because of my recovery and liberation. So again, you need multiple words. So we still use it because we talk a lot about community resilience in response to collective and historical trauma. So we have it here, but just pay attention to the word's impact. I also want to throw in that when we talk about recovery and resilience, that it's not always about the capacity of the individual. And this is where your work is so important. It's not just about what I have in me, but it's like what I have around me, right? Do I have access to housing and to air conditioners and to community supports and to nutrition? Because all of that is kind of necessary to be able to flourish. All right, how we doing? Am I making a little bit of sense? I'm just going to check in. Okay, cool. All right. 2 things we do in our work, and again, I say our work because I think our work is your work, like we're in this together, and so take any of this But in our trauma-informed care work, we ask these 3 questions always. So whether we're talking about whether we should close the clinic at 3, or whether we should paint the lobby blue, or whether that question on the form needs to be changed, we're asking this: how might that help? How might that hurt? And how might identity impact that? So another way to think about that is, how might that help? How might that hurt? And for whom is that happening for? Right? So I just want you to take that away and kind of tuck it, to use that whenever. So if you're like, is this trauma informed? You can ask those 3 questions. What about it helps, hurts, and how might identity influence that? We also look at all trauma-informed care work in 3 different levels. And you'll see this a little bit embedded today. And if we talk more, you'll hear me talk about this. Is that the practice of trauma-informed care happens at the intrapersonal level, which is me, like how am I showing up as an individual? The interpersonal, so within the workforce, how do we have time for relationship, connection, learning from each other? And then the organizational, operational expectations. Okay, so we'll see an example of this later on, but just know that's how I'm always thinking in these 3 different layers as we move forward. You'll happen to know that trauma-informed care has a thing with 3s. We like things in 3s. Our brains like things in 3s, so just be prepared for that. All right, we're going to move into this idea of then, what is trauma-informed care? So trauma-informed care, that we have this big definition that we use from Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, says a program, organization, or system is trauma-informed. And I always stop here, and those of you who've heard me before know this, because this is the most important thing about this definition that you see, is that it says a program, organization, or system. It does not say an individual, family, or group. Trauma-informed care is applied at the organizational level. So it's about changing organizations and systems, right? Because we know something about the impact of trauma. So a program, organization, or system, and as I go through each of the 4 R's, I want you to kind of rate your organization or your practice in your head, like how well are you doing on each of these? Because that tells you kind of where you can start. So the first R is, does your program, organization, your system, your service realize the widespread impact of trauma? Do you know what trauma looks like in your community and those you serve, right? And it's really important to get localized data, because we have a society that sometimes says that happens over there, right? That happens over there. So really having good localized data about how is it showing up for those you serve, and what types of things are showing up. At the same time, we want you to also understand multiple paths of recovery. So y'all know we love to think there's a one size fits all in our policy work, and we know that doesn't work, right? So what are the multiple pathways of recovery, which is why your work is so important, right? Because all of our work around social determinants of health and all that work, that's where recovery happens. It's rarely in a therapist office only, right? So we need to make sure that we're holding that and we're funding and we're having policies around multiple pathways. So 1, do you realize those 2 things? 2, do you recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients and those you're serving, in yourself? And you're going to start to hear me say, we work mostly with the workforce, right? Do we notice it in ourselves, as well as in the other systems we work with, right? Do you know any systems that might be experiencing a lot of stress right now, and that may be harder to engage with them? So here's I'm going to do a little polling question with an emoji. And so you can find an emoji that says yes, whichever works for you. But how many of you, when you're experiencing a lot of stress for whatever reason, do you get kind of big? Like you have a lot of energy. You might be spinning around. You might be talking more, like you're going to have a lot of movement happening. Lori's looking. But just see what else you got. See how many of you are big energy people. And y'all, if you don't know, just ask the people you live and love around, because they'll let you know what you look like, right? How many of you, when you experience a lot of stress, get really quiet, like you're just gonna check out, right? Yeah, because that's me. Like, if I get quiet, you should be like, whoa, what's going on, right? Yeah, excellent. We seem to have a skewed group here, so good to know. So again, realize, recognize, and then y'all work at a university, and we love to realize the problem. We love to recognize the problems, but we don't really do anything with them. We love to tell you how big they are and that they're happening, but we actually want people to respond. Like you are likely already doing trauma-informed care, and there's a lot we can just keep doing, right? So we want people to respond by integrating this knowledge of the impact of trauma in its broad definition into our policies, procedures, and practices. So here's an example of a trauma-informed policy is asking as every staff member at the beginning of their year of service when they're going to take a vacation or time off that's at least 5 days in a row. That's a trauma-informed policy, y'all. So I want us to be thinking that's kind of where we want to get your juices running right now about that's what trauma-informed care looks like. And we'll talk about why that's so important, right? But really looking at our policies, our procedures, what is your intake procedure? How long do people, what does your paperwork look like? It is about all of these things, right? And then we'd like you to actively resist re-traumatization. That's your 4th R. And again, you should be thinking how well your program, organization, or practice is doing in each of these R's. We say resist re-traumatization because we know for a lot of people, a lot of the things that we do or can't do for folks might create harm. So we want to try to prevent the harm. If we can't, we want to mitigate, repair, honor, acknowledge, right, when that happens, and think about how we can do things a little less based on our practices. So big picture of what trauma-informed care is. A couple of things that are pretty important to know the difference of is the difference of trauma-specific services and trauma-informed care. So trauma-specific services are those interventions for individuals, families, and groups to either help with symptoms of trauma or to help with flourishing and skill building and growth. They often come in kind of dominant classic kind of places. They often come with acronyms and with reimbursements. So trauma-focused cognitive behavioral treatment, eye motor desensitization, so EMDR. So so they're interventions versus trauma-informed care, which is when the organization or system uses knowledge about trauma impacts to do better services. So here's the important thing. We believe everyone should be trauma-informed. Not everyone should have trauma-specific services. So y'all, I think the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, should be trauma-informed. I don't want therapy at the DMV. Maybe a llama. I don't know, right? I believe Social Security Administration buildings need to be trauma-informed. I don't need therapy at the Social Security Administration building. So that's where you want to start to think about, most of you need to be trauma-informed. You don't provide trauma-specific service. You'd want a referral for that or some access to that. So really, and it's really important because people will say, oh, Mandy, we're super trauma-informed. We trained everybody on this treatment modality. Now, Vic, that's nice. But everyone looks really tired and burned out and your staff keeps changing over, then you're not trauma-informed, right? So when we think about policy, people tend to mix those things up. All right, a couple of things, again, just to keep kind of trying to put trauma-informed care where it needs to kind of how we want to think about it, is that this is kind of the what it is and what it's not. So it's important to think about that, especially if it's new, about what really is it? Sometimes it's helpful to think about what it's not. So first of all, trauma-informed care absolutely supports accountability. Some people are like, you want everyone to do whatever they want because they've had trauma. I'm like, nope. We love accountability. We just want it done with compassion and with the why. So you can't, this behavior is not helpful right now, but here's why I understand it may be happening, right? So accountability with compassion. It's not about just being nicer and smiling more. It's actually about being thoughtful and intentional. It's not focusing on the negative. Like you can do trauma-informed care and never use the word trauma, never ask about people's trauma. We take a universal precaution approach. I assume all of you have experiences of trauma. And so I do my best to kind of show up holding space in that way. It's absolutely about focusing on strengths and skills and healing, right? Like we want to promote flourishing. We're just going to do it in a way that understands trauma. So let's say you teach a class on financial skill building. If you know about the brain and trauma, you might do that in 30-minute increments versus an hour and a half. That's doing trauma-informed care with actually not talking about trauma. It's not the end all be all, right? It's not just a training. It's about a commitment to a process of constant learning because we're constantly learning about impacts of trauma. Really important, and to the call to you all, right, is that you're asked to be culturally linguistically appropriate and trauma informed. So trauma informed care is in the service of that, right? It's in the service of that. I like to tell people it's the adjective, and then I question my grammar skills, but it's not a noun. You don't go get trauma informed, right? You need housing, you need medical care, you need air conditioners, you need these things. They need to be provided in a trauma informed way. And so it should never take away from the work that, should be integrated with, inclusion, culturally responsive, healing centered, trauma informed, should all come together. And then of course it's not new. Again, if you sit down and look at what you're doing, you're likely trauma informed in a lot of ways. It's just we often haven't made that a policy yet, right? So a person is doing some really great stuff, but we haven't systemized it to a policy. All right, so I'm going to talk for a few minutes about why it's so important, and then I'll get you to some resources about how to apply it. What's most important for me, for you to know, is why we think it's important. And as I do that, I'm hoping you'll see yourself in this. So we believe that trauma, adversity, scarcity, in all of its ways, affect how people approach services. So here's the kind of maybe the secret, not really, because I say it all the time. Trauma-informed care for us is really an engagement tool. It's an engagement tool. You need something people need, right? Like you have something people need, but what we were finding is people weren't getting to the services that we have that are great and fabulous and wonderful because of historical, systemic, individual, and collective trauma. Okay, so here's how this kind of looks. So I'm going to do this little hand brain model. Many of you maybe have done it before, but it's a great way to talk about this. But Dan Siegel kind of teaches us, gives us this little thing to say. So what he teaches us is that he gives us this hand brain model. So he says your thumb is your amygdala. It's kind of your threat sensor. It's what tells you like this is dangerous or not. Your fingers represent your prefrontal cortex. It's your thinking brain, like, oh, let's make decisions, long-term planning, pros and cons. This is your brainstem. And what Dan Siegel teaches us, as well as all the folks who do great trauma work, is that all of these senses come through our spinal cord. So you walk into a space and you see and you sight, and so whatever senses you have available come into your whole being, and they travel up to your amygdala. And your amygdala says, this is safe or not safe. If it goes, okay, it's safe enough, then your thinking brain comes online. If it says, nope, you need to wait a minute, right? Then you're going to stay in this spot. So why am I bothering to talk about this? Especially in this format, it's so important that we understand that your brain and body react to what's in front of it based on its history with what's in front of it. I'm going to say that again. Your brains and body react to what's in front based on its history. So you think about the last time someone had to come to your building or fill out a form or ask for support. Whatever those things were, those are the things that people are going to get ready for, right? Like you came to a 90-minute training about trauma-informed care. Did you come on here going, oh, it's going to be tough, right? Did you go, oh, I'm like, how you came to this based on your history with virtual trainings and the word trauma-informed care or me, right? So this is, again, in bigger work, and you could do this work yourself, or what are those variables that people first input and get ready for when you're doing your work? I'm a short, white, Southern social worker, and those are variables that first come up for people when I say hello, right? So let's go back to why it's important to trauma-informed care. So remember that what we know is that when people feel a real threat or really important is a perceived threat, you flip your lid. And I believe that a lot of times we and our systems and our protocols are the perceived threat. Not because of who we are. Everyone here seems lovely. I actually don't know, but I'm going to go there, right? So here's what happens is people come to us in our systems with their lids already flipped. So I'm going to ask you in the chat, feel free to, if you want to I always say unmute, but in the chat, what are some reasons why somebody might come into your particular service, however, whatever service you do, and I was looking at your things, why might they come with their lids already flipped? Just take a minute, let's ground into that. Yeah, living in fear. So like their daily life of fear, pain, right? So maybe physical or emotional pain.
They might take
Yeah.
In,
No,
my,
go ahead.
in our case, that we offer training, we are
Yeah.
training to impact. Where we see is that sometimes, and we hear it from participants say, "Oh, I came in just thinking this was gonna be so boring and so frustrating to sit here for so
Yeah.
long, but hey, it was different."
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So people's expectations, right? They're tired, they're overworked, they have to go to another training, right? The healthcare system has not met their expectations, their survival mode, right? Experience of being disrespected. It's like people are ready for us to not do well by them, right? So this is really important because this is what we're working with. Some of the best questions you can ask people are, when is the last time you, and fill in the blank, came to this building, had to fill out a form, met with again, whatever makes sense for you. Because they're like, it was great. You can start there. So to go back to trauma-informed care, what we believe is a lot of people are coming like this, and a lot of times it's because of the lack of parking, or your building's hard to find, or they're hungry, or they desperately need what you have as like life and survival for them. So they come in ready. So y'all, trauma-informed care at its best, some of us have the job to help people when they're in this kind of moment. But trauma-informed care at its best keeps you from flipping your lid. That's what we want trauma-informed care to do. Because what we know is that dysregulated people cannot help dysregulated people. End of story. This never works. What this is an amygdala to amygdala conversation. Have any of you had an amygdala to amygdala conversation recently? Right? If you have small children around you, you have them all the time. Right? Why did you kick your brother? I don't know. It felt good. Just reactionary. Just did it. These amygdala to amygdala conversations are pretty exhausting, and they're not productive. But here's the real important message in my kind of world and work, is that in trauma-informed care, our concern is if we end up in an amygdala to amygdala conversation, the person with the least amount of power loses out. So when our system flips their lid, our workforce, ourself, me, oftentimes is a person needing our supports that loses out. All of a sudden we have staff turnover. All of a sudden I'm not picking up your phone call. All of a sudden you're at the back of the line, or security is called, like, because we've gotten activated. So trauma-informed care at its most best keeps our workforce as well as possible. And when we do flip our lids, we have a healthy response to that as a workforce, so that we can stay on the job well. And then we're in a position to actually be helping people get the resources they need. So I'm gonna stop and just get a little emoji check. Is this making some sense? Check some stuff. Right. All right. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you. Excellent. All right. I'll check my time here. And I am going to leave time for some questions and answers, just in case you're like, that's great, but I need this. So we'll get there. We'll get there. We're not going to teach on the science of trauma-informed care today, but I want you to know it's grounded in science. So we talk about near science in this work. So that's that all these decisions are talked about trauma-informed care. Do I like the light bulb then? In neuroscience is neurobiology, how our brains grow and develop, and how it's impacted by stress and trauma across generations. Epigenetics, I just got ahead of myself. Epigenetics, the E, talks about how that stress and trauma can get transmitted through our DNA or on top of our DNA. So think about nature and nurture together, right? The A is adverse childhood and community experiences. So how do both adverse and now, if you know the HOPE research, positive experiences prior to the age of 18, what impact they have on our long-term life, right? And then the R stands for resilience and recovery science. So we look through everything through that lens, and we kind of take it in and we say, how do we apply it to our practice? So another way to define trauma-informed care is that in trauma-informed care, we pay attention to how our policies, procedures, and processes are the perceived threat that result in our staff and those we serve to flip their lids. That's just another way to think about definition. Like, what are those policies and procedures we want to, and that's what we do with organizations. We're like, okay, well, what are your protocols and policies, and where might there be hot spots of activation, and can we shift those in any way? So this is a big topic, but I can't not talk about workforce wellness when we talk about trauma-informed care, because I'm going to say about 90% of the work around trauma-informed care is about workforce wellness. A lot of our work in trauma-informed care lands in human resources and our hiring and our onboarding and our training and our transitions out, right? That we really hold across the lifespan. So I bring this up just because as I started today with like, we need to expand our definition of trauma. And because I know something about the workforce and the hard work we're all trying to do in community, I want you to know we also need to expand our concept of like burnout. Because we only really talk about burnout and there's more to it than that. And so I just want to invite you to think about kind of a little bit more depth around the wellness of our workforce. So we're going to talk about things like parallel process, when we start to mimic, when we actually start to look like the systems and the struggles that we're working for. Like if you work in crisis, you start to kind of create crisis in your own space as well, right? We're going to talk about vicarious trauma, where you it's kind of the negative impact of your worldview because you work in trauma, trauma, versus secondary traumatic stress, when you kind of see in someone else's story in your own mind and body, versus burnout, which is just absolute exhaustion from the work. Then there's moral injury, which is a big one that we don't talk about, that we need to talk about more, which is a feeling, it's really a deep feeling of like not being able to do that which you know needs to be done, right? Like, you know, you can save or help someone, but you don't have enough food, air conditioners, vaccines, whatever that is. And then we have vicarious resilience and compassion satisfaction. So how do we actually, can we talk about how we can love our work, love being in the work, even though it's hard? Again, big concepts, but I want to constantly ask people to just start to think a little deeper than saying everybody's burned out. The reason why it's important is that the interventions are different. Some of these words need an intervention that's systemic. Some of these words need an intervention that's individual. So the organization needs to have access to EMDR or some type of treatment intervention. The individual needs to go to the intervention. So that's why we want to be a little bit more nuanced. And one of the things that we're not talking about in depth today because we have just a minute together, but I just feel like I have to say is one of the things we work on is that interventions need to be broader, right? I mean, my goal is to try to find funding and support and reimbursement codes for cultural-based practices, right? So community events, community connections, those type of things are quite healing in the world of the work we do. So I'm just gonna let you stare at this graph for a minute and see if any of those examples feel alive for you. Like, see if you've experienced that in your organization or practice now or in your community. What these things are, or these are often symptoms of an organization when it's been experiencing a lot of stress and trauma. It might be a trauma-informed organization. This isn't a judgment, but a lot of our organizations go through hard times, budget cuts, losses of people. And when that starts to happen a lot, you'll start to see some of these traits pop up. So I'm going to stop a minute and just kind of look in the chat again. Let me know if any of you can kind of thumbs up or whatever other emoji you want, a positive based emoji, to let me know if you've ever noticed this in any of the workspaces that you do your work in. Thanks, Leslie. Yeah. And I hope when you get this slide that you actually like print it out and put it in front of you, because like our organization has gone through this. A lot of individuals experience a lot of losses, and so that starts to show up in our work and how are we making thoughtful decisions? Are we being too crisis oriented? Are we kind of jumping to the need of urgency? So really finding ways. Because again, remember, trauma-informed care needs a well enough organization and a well enough workforce to be able to provide the needs to the communities we serve, however we serve them. This is an example, so I'm going to get ready to move into resources for organizations. This is an example of how we do our work. For instance, at the intrapersonal level, like the things like I need to take my vacation days. I need to practice my own regulation during the workday, right? I need to do debriefings or whatever I need for myself. And then how do we have skills for each? So do you have skills to co-regulate in the workforce? Do you have protocols to respond to a coworker who might be in crisis? Is your organization or practice build in time for connection? And then the operation organizational level, right? Does the organization give days off? Does it have safe space? Do you have human resources, you know, in the sense of like that support this work? How are your feedback processes, right? Are you modeling the well that's desired, right? So as a director, I can't say, go take care of yourself and then be sending emails at 11 p.m. at night without some explanation of why I'm doing that, right? So just a reminder that it's this interconnectedness, right? The organization has to do some things as well as we need to, you know, everyone has to be involved at that level. All right, so I'm going to stop and do a little activity because I want some energy. I'm going to invite you to write down. If you're in a position to write down, you can think about it. You can dance it out if you want to do that, you know, however you want to do that. But I want you to see if you can come up with 4 what we call buffers. Now, buffers, it's important for you to hear me tell you what a buffer is. Buffers don't end the stressor. They often don't take away the thing that's causing us stress, but they help us to metabolize those stress hormones. So it doesn't mean we're all zenned out and when world peace happens, but it helps us kind of stay in a best way. So a buffer might look like, I always like to do it as the example of the bowling alley. Do you know they have those bumpers in a bowling alley? Those bumpers don't get you a strike. They just keep the ball from going off the rails and hurting others, right? So think of your buffers like that. It might be binge watching Netflix. It might be taking a walk, whatever it is. So see if you can come up, and if you want to share in the chat, great, to crowdsource, but see if you can come up with at least 4 buffers. I'm going to give you like 30, 45 seconds. And again, I welcome them in the chat, or you can just write them down. Yeah, reading, going for a walk, meditation, deep breathing. Yeah, chocolate. You have to mention chocolate. Yeah, rock climbing, excellent. Close my door, yeah. Walk to lunch, that's a good one. Dim lights, going for a run. Baking, yeah. Talking with a friend, working out. I love that you all are getting like all of the 7 things that are proven to work. Making lists, yeah. Call a good friend, writing, keep the environment not too stimulating, right? Journaling, absolutely. So what I want you to think about when you look at your buffer list and we look at the things that people are offering, because you might be like, oh, I want to try that one, right? Is I want you to notice how many of those are available to you during your workday. Because a lot of times our buffers are like after the workday. Like I've had a hard day, so now I'm gonna. And the reality is, folks, that's not really what we want, right? Like that's lovely, and you need to metabolize that before maybe you like during the day as well. And this is where like I'm looking at policies that allow that to happen. So there's some sectors that actually provide people gym memberships and then time during the day to go work out. So they don't carry it home, right? Or having a tea service that's available to everyone all the time. And again, people are working virtually, it's going to look different. So we can talk about that, right? Hugs boost oxytocin, absolutely. And Christine, we joke when we talk about the hugging is literally one of the seven ways, but we're like, maybe not at work, because human resource people are like, because it's not the like pat on the back, it's like a sink it in, whew, let your nervous system kind of settle in, right? Or having just a space to go have a big cry. Like I worked with a school one time and they're like, they didn't have anywhere where they could just escape for a minute and yell or cry. So literally that's what we worked on, finding space. So this is what trauma-informed care is really going to sit with, is how do we bring these things we know work, but make them part of our work, right? Modeling the model in the moment, right? So to bring us back to like, okay, but what now? How do we implement TIC that you're being asked to do? Is that we have these 6 principles. And I won't be going through each one of these, but I just want you to know when someone says, is this trauma informed? We go through these principles, right? So to what extent does that practice create, elevate, or does it hinder physical and psychological safety for staff and for those served? to what extent does that practice or policy change elevate or hinder transparency for staff and for those served? And we're going to walk through each one. Meaningful inclusion of lived experience. Is it culturally responsive, right? And I love the comment you just put in about hugs being cultural, right? That's why we have to ground everything in cultural experiences, right? Because that may be what creates safety, right? Because safety is defined by by you, by me, by all of us. So just know, and it's never about all 6 of these being perfect. So a lot of times, in order to enhance safety, you may reduce transparency. I was with a hospital recently in another state, and like they have their first name on their badge to have some relationship, but they don't have their last name to have a little bit of safety. Right? So but you're being intentional to say, we know if we do this way, and we don't share power and decision making, it might create some of those symptoms I showed you earlier. Right? Even though we might do it to have safety or whatever that is. So you're constantly just in relationship with these 6 principles and how they show up for people. Now we get into but how do you do this? And I will be super interested to open this up a little bit and see how you think about applying this, and does it feel like it applies at your level wherever you're showing up in the work? Because remember, we work across all sectors and we ask all people, a lot of entities to work on this. There are 5 essential elements. So another way to think about am I trauma informed is I would look for these. I would come to you and say, okay, here's the things I would like to see. Do you have robust training and education for those that work, however they work with and around you, from the beginning to the end of their work cycle? So the question I ask myself always is, who needs to know what by when? Because we want everybody to know what we call the foundations of trauma-informed care. I want, and they do, my neighbors to know the foundations of trauma-informed care. So everyone gets this much information, and then does a finance department get this much? Does a development department? Does an outreach worker? So what else do different people need to know? I would look to see if you're committed as an agency, and that means, is there funding, or is there a position, or is there a mission statement? And is it written into your expectations and that agency commitment? Then do you have a feedback process? Like, how do you know? And the best way to know if it's trauma informed is to ask people that you serve and those you work alongside. So do you have a robust feedback process for those served and staff? Do you have a way to review every policy and practice through a trauma informed and culturally responsive lens? And then finally, is it kind of baked into your climate and culture, right? And this is this is about, are there connections? Are there's time for connection? Do you have relationship building skills built in, right? Is there laughter? What are the norms expected within your work, organization, and community? So these are the 5 elements we kind of work towards. So if you're like, great, they tell me to be trauma informed, and then you would start here, big picture here, but also want you to know we have all these things for you. And we want you to take them and modify them. So we have a policy and practice review protocol, and you could take it and modify it for your level of work. So that brings me to this important tool. It's free and available online. I'm gonna actually go ahead and put a bunch of resources. So these resources are available for you all. Again, we recommend you look at them, modify them, call us, ask for help, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. But this is basically an assessment tool for trauma-informed care. So you'll see all these things, and you'll notice most of these are about the workforce and about how we kind of set up our policies and procedures. So these 5 elements are all here. And for each element, we then ask kind of a 1 to 5 scale. The beauty of this instrument that's being used now, it's a new tool that people are getting access to, and they're finding it helpful because it shows change over time. Because maybe your organization is doing really well, but then, there's a big budget cut or a grant loss or a fire or something happens that shifts that number so that you can show constant change. It also helps if you're talking to someone or if you're filling out a grant or an application, it says you need to be trauma informed, you can say, well, this is what we're doing, and this is where we're going to put our energy. This is what we're doing well. Oops. Let me fix this. But y'all, what I want you to know about this tool is that there's 2 ways to approach the tool. That wasn't helpful. You can download it and do it yourself. You can download and kind of do it however you want. You can also access the implementation lab, which works a couple doors down, who actually can also does staff surveys and does a more robust audit. So there are lots of ways to access this and different resources online. What I want to show you is like, this is what it looks like. So we're just going to practice one together so you get a sense of this. So one of the standards, I will, Lori, one of the standards is welcoming first point of contact. So the first point of contact, like your lobby, or if it's a phone or intake or transport or Zoom meeting, is welcoming and engaging as possible for individuals you serve. The first point of contact is informative, helpful, culturally and linguistically appropriate, anticipates needs, and is respectful. Those are the 5 things we're going to be looking for. And every one of these things, y'all, the number one is always the organization hasn't yet just been aware that that needs to happen, right? That's the first thing. It's always going to be number one. Number 2 is the organization demonstrates an awareness, like you know that you need to do it, but you kind of haven't started it yet. Number 3 here is that all first points of contact have been identified and reviewed for the potential. A plan to assess them is in play. 4 is you've moved a little forward. And 5 is always you've embedded a new policy or procedure. It's now systemized. There's a review every January, or whatever it is. So let's go with 2A for a second. And just if you in the chat, and again, you don't need to identify who you like, where you do your work, but if you could think about how your work and the way that you work shows up right now, how would you rate yourself 1 to 5 on welcoming first point of contact? Not yet aware, but not moving, haven't been able to do anything yet. 3, you're starting to assess, there's a plan in place for a regular assessment. 4, you're assessing, and 5, there's a process in place for folks to tell you if they're feeling activated or unsafe. So just throw out a number 1 through 5 based on what you think. Excellent. Let's see a 4. And I should tell you, as we've done this assessment around Oregon and actually around other countries and et cetera, is most people are in the 1 and 2s. Most people are 1 and 2s. And what reason is they've sometimes had a person doing great work, but if the person leaves, the work leaves. So it's not in the policies yet. So they're usually at a 1 and 2. But it sounds like it's great. We've had some 4s and some 3s. So for each of those elements, this is what you would see. You would go through and we've developed this in such a way that if you score yourself a 2, it should help you know how to get to a 3. Like you don't really need outside expertise to help you know what to do to get to a 3. And that's kind of our hope, is that you can really find this to be useful and use on your own. Here's another one. We'll do one more together and then I'll show you some other resources to access. So workforce wellness. So your agency or your organization's workforce wellness is 1. It's systematically addressed. It's inclusive. It's actually used. It addresses burnout and toxic stress and is positively received by staff. So number 1, organizations not yet demonstrating awareness of the need. Number 2, the organization is aware of value of supporting the wellness of their workforce, but has not developed a plan. Number 3, a wellness team is in place that includes service users, providers, leadership, interdisciplinary staff. And it's reviewing the call. It's kind of starting to figure out, getting data and trying to figure out a plan. 4 is in place and includes policies, procedures, practices, activities, services, and social and physical environments. But really important here is that 70% of staff are aware of 1 or more wellness activity. And then we get to number 5, where we see this kind of, it's in policy and procedure, but the 75 to 100% of staff report that wellness activities are inclusive, regularly used and positive. So now we're putting some kind of numbers and data behind that. So I see some people maybe have already. So if you think about workforce wellness in your organization, where might you put yourself on a 1 to 5 scale? Twos and some 3s, 2 to 3, 4. Yeah, I'm always the one that's like 1.5. So I'm not going to pick one or the other. Welcome to have that as well. So I just want to remind you, again, you have access to this. So if someone is asking you to kind of talk about how you're trauma informed, you could use this to say, you know, we're a 4, we're a 3, we're a 2, we're a 1, we're doing really strong at element 1. So we're going to focus on element 4, specifically on a perfect, like one of the parts of it. So it really should be a roadmap, kind of helps you know where you are and where you're headed. You can't do it all at once, right? So I often will say that you could also pick one, like one of these things might lead to 2 or 3 things also moving forward, right? So if you're looking at policy practice review, it might also then inform other things. So you're getting really smart about where you need your resources. What we do in organizations we work with, often they've had an audit, external audit, and so they come to us when this is complete. And then we ask the staff, what resonates the most with you? And they often will pick the top 3 things that they want to work on. And it might be something where they're a 4 and they just don't need much to get it to a 5. So really what feels alive for your staff. All right. So I'm going to show you a few other things and then I'm going to stop talking and leave us about 15 minutes for any questions and answers, or maybe answers, hopefully, but definitely questions, because if I can't answer it today, I'll get back to you. But I just want you to know about Trauma Informed Oregon, our website. I'll put all this stuff in the chat in a minute, unless somebody wants to grab that now. But on our website, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. We don't bug you with newsletters. We just mostly send out kind of upcoming events. So we do a lot of education and training. So we run constantly some foundations of trauma informed care virtually. We can also come into spaces and places. But you'll find out in that events newsletter about where we're going to be. So we're going to be out in community. I'm going to be on the road a lot in this fall. So there's that. There's also free, like you can download the videos yourself or have staff watch them. There's a workbook. You can do this work by yourself. We also run an ongoing, we're taking a break over the summer, but we'll start it back up, an ongoing micro lesson series. So we're doing things like trauma-informed decision-making, trauma-informed case note writing, trauma-informed boundary setting. So we're getting really specific. They're 1 hour. You come in, you learn a thing, you leave. We also have a same series around workforce wellness. We have a trauma-informed culturally just supervision series. We have a train the trainer. So all these things, there'll be a calendar that gets popped out probably end of August with the year-long calendar. So just know that you can access those things. You can call us. I'll put our email in as well. I'm going to put 2 emails in. So there's a training request box and there's also just information. So if you're like, hey, do you have this resource, or can I just talk to you for like 30 minutes or an hour? Feel free to do that. That's what we're here for. Obviously we have the assessment instruments. We can look at policy reviews. We love to be out in community. So again, I'll be out in community and you can hear where I'm going to be and we can go have coffee or talk about how this can, how you can help kind of implement trauma informed care at the level you're in. So, and again, let us know if you need help. Like if you're like, I'm trying to do this, someone I know has already asked about the implementation tool in Spanish. I will check to see where we are with that getting translated. I thought it had already been done, but I need to check. And our train the trainer, we have a train the trainer in Spanish that happens. So it's culturally specific training. So we have that work that's coming. But if you say, I need this, I need that, then that's my job, is to try to figure out how to make that happen. A couple things I'll just end on are what agencies often do is sometimes they just start with like assessing what they're already doing that's engaging populations. Or maybe they start with just getting some data about how trauma shows up in their population. They might do some training education. Again, you can use any of our resources, right? But really starting with what's already happening can be a really great place to build from there. Because again, if you're successful in what you're doing, you're likely doing trauma-informed care. So let me stop. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. I'm going to drop some more resources in, but I just want to open it up either in the chat or you can unmute. We'll open it up for a few minutes for questions and answers, and then I'll kind of leave you with a few more resources. So stop sharing if I can find the share. There we go. So any thoughts, needs, questions, resources? Remember, I'll count to about 10 and then I'll answer.
Mandy, we would just need about 5 minutes towards the end to wrap up. So just letting you know ahead of time.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so here's what I'm going to leave you with. Dum-ba-dum. This is from a dear friend and colleague of mine from the United Kingdom, but I kind of live this every day, especially when I need it, is a reminder that every moment and interaction can be an intervention. So another way to think of trauma-informed care is this practice, protocol, question, form, trauma-inducing or trauma-reducing, right? So just constantly thinking that that's what we're trying to do in trauma-informed care. We're trying to create systems where people can flourish, and more importantly, where we aren't activating people and then preventing them from getting what they need because, did you ever have someone in your life who did that? Like, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. And then when you're like, stop it, they're like, huh. That's actually what I'm working on in trauma-informed care because the system does that a lot. We just pile on a lot of hardship for people and then they blow. And then we're like, see, the trauma-informed care wants to really look at all that. Can we take away all that and sit in relationship where people can flourish? So with that note, and I am really, again, this not always the best place, but I really am interested if you're based on all of the different type of work you're doing. If you're like, but how can I do this? Again, at the end, I'll stay after for a little bit, or you can give us a call because I'm happy to help you think about that. Before I turn it over, and again, I'm still open for questions, but I want to make sure people have, if you can use social work CEUs, continuing education units, fill out that survey I just put in the link and we'll get you those by email. And then there is a feedback survey that's just 3 or 4 questions, basically like, what else do you need? What else, would be helpful? And that's a great place too, if you're like, here are all the things I need. So feel free to fill out any of those. And then I think I will close. I think I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Mandy.
Yeah.
I just want to do a final call if there were any questions while we have you here. All right. Well then, Chelsea, if you wouldn't mind putting our final slides up, we'll just do a few closing housekeeping items and I'll hand it over to my colleague Lori to do that.
Thank you, Tanya. And I'm just going to go ahead and continue with some next steps after our presentation today. So Chelsea, if you could move to the next slide, please. We have upcoming sessions that we're going to be having, but in August, we are taking a break. No session is planned at this time. We're going to use this time to prep for the fall. And so you can use this time to review past training sessions. And we'll resume again in September. September 24th, 2024 from 1 to 2:30 is our next session time, but we have not like nailed down a topic yet, but we will just please stay tuned for that. We'll be putting that on our HRSN page, which I'll be talking about here in a little bit. Chelsea, could you move to the next slide, please? So if you're ready to become an HRSN provider, you can review our past HRSN training sessions at the link below. You can apply to become an HRSN provider for OpenCard. And to do that, you can find the provider enrollment application at the link that we have on the slide. And it's under provider enrollment. And then once you've completed that application, you can email the provider enrollment team at that email address, letting them know you've submitted the application. And then if you have questions about enrolling as a HRSN provider, you can look at the provider enrollment guide and refer to that, or call the OHA provider enrollment team at that number or at the email address that's on this slide. And right at this moment, we are now enrolling climate and outreach and engagement providers, and housing providers may start enrolling on August 1st, 2024. And Chelsea, could you move to the next slide, please? Lastly, we have a HRSN provider resources page with a HRSN provider webpage, and then HRSN provider journey. And that also has a guide to support Oregon HRSN service providers. And then under the HRSN webpage itself, there's links included to several different resources. There's the HRSN request form for climate-related devices, which is a fillable form in English, and there's going to be some available in more languages soon. Outreach and engagement fact sheet in English and in Spanish. And then climate supports frequently asked questions that is available in English and Spanish. And there's going to be more available languages soon. And then OHP Climate Supports webpage, which contains links to the climate related supports, which is a 2-pager and it's available in 7 different languages. And then also a climate related supports fee schedule. And now I'll go ahead and hand back over to Tanya for the conclusion of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. All right, and with that, I think I will close it out. Since we have a couple minutes left, we might hang out here a second if anyone thought of anything. But thank you so much to everyone who joined us. It's always a pleasure to have you here. I will send a follow-up email with all of the information. I see someone in the chat put an email. I'll make sure to send stuff your way. The follow-up email will have links to everything, a link to our website where we post all the slides. And I will also send out our own feedback survey. So if you have any ideas on how we can continue to improve the trainings we offer you, please let us know, because we want to make sure that these are useful to you in your work, and that you are supported as you become HRSN service providers. Huge thank you to Mandy for joining us today. I got so many messages privately about how great this training was. So I really appreciate it. And I know it was super well received.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your summer. We will see you all back here, same time, same place in September. Bye all.